Hello everyone, can you hear me okay at the back? Yes, excellent. So good afternoon and welcome to this next panel session. I'm Callum Sinclair, I'm the partner and head of technology and commercial at law firm Burness Paull, and I co-lead our UK Fintech practice. We talked a lot about the importance of trust economy in recent years, including sessions at Fintech Summit. And there's now a new frontier in trust in the form of artificial intelligence, or AI. The technology itself, as we know, is not new, but the game-changing abilities of large language models and generative AI, combined with their level of exposure to the public, is new. And can you believe it was less than 12 months ago that ChatGPT was unleashed for public use? And this has profound implications for the financial sector, both in potential opportunities and new and evolving risks. In a recent report by the Alan Turing Institute called The AI Revolution, Opportunities and Challenges for the Financial Sector, compiled by academics at the universities of Edinburgh and Warwick and also by the FCA, AI is described as a paradigm shift in technology's role in finance. With me today to discuss some of those opportunities and risks is a stellar panel of experts. Shortly, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly and we'll get going. We don't have a huge amount of time today, so I'm going to ask them to give me their thoughts on my opening question to them to set the scene, and then immediately after introducing themselves. There may or may not be time for audience questions. If there's not, then we're very happy to continue the discussion at our exhibition hall stand at Burness Paull. And please do scan our QR code too to win 2 hours of free legal advice. So with that plug, let's get going. And I'm going to start this afternoon with Steph Wright. So Steph, could you introduce yourself, please? And could you set the scene for us by introducing the work of the Scottish AI Alliance and how that might be relevant to preserving trust and consumer confidence in financial services?
Hello, everyone. Can't believe it is afternoon. But yes, I'm Steph Wright. I'm the head of the Scottish AI Alliance. To any of you who are unfamiliar with what that is, I certainly hope not, but if you are, the Scottish AI Alliance is the body tasked with the delivery of Scotland's national AI strategy. It's a unique partnership between the Data Lab and the Scottish Government in its delivery. The strategy was launched at the end of March 2021, and its overall vision was that Scotland becomes a leader in the development and use of trustworthy, ethical, and inclusive AI. And those 3 values are the lens through which we carry out all our activity. We are firm believers that AI can fundamentally transform the way we live our lives, but we need to make sure that it's for the benefit of all and not the few. I find this an interesting conversation around AI as a tool to build trust in financial services, because I posed the question whether people trust financial services in the first place without AI. And then if you're adding something like AI, which in many surveys, ultimately people do not trust, and you're compounding these 2 elements together, I think it kind of brings a really interesting situation. But one thing I must say about financial services, it is a very high stakes application of AI, and let's not make any underestimation of that, just like healthcare is. But what financial services have in place that is really a really good start and foundation for using something like AI is that financial services are very tightly regulated. And I think that in itself is an encouraging benchmark to start from. There's obviously a lot of talk about AI regulation at the moment. There's no answer to all those questions because ultimately it's really hard to regulate something that is moving at such a pace. But at least financial services aren't starting from scratch. There's already a very robust regulatory framework in place that can help mitigate perhaps some of the potential challenges around AI. But a piece Callum wrote about the trust economy I just thought was really interesting, where he kind of said that we're kind of in this kind of situation with a lot of the big tech and also financial services where we kind of sort of have to trust them because we need to use them. But at the same time, we also think it's toxic and really evil. And I think that's a really interesting concept because it's forced trust. And you could say that a lot about a lot of things that we use. But you have to recognize that financial services, AI or not, the kind of technology advancements in the sector, we have to acknowledge that we need to, in the transition to the future, we need to make sure we don't leave people behind because they are not digitally literate enough, or are too old to use technology or stuff, because everyone needs access to financial services, and we just need to make sure that we don't lose sight of people when we're talking about service improvements, improvements to the bottom line, etc. But I'm just here to give a shout to the people and ensure that ethics and inclusivity and trustworthiness are, core to how you deploy any technology in any sector. Thank you.
Thanks, Steph. Yeah, so I'm going to hand over to Jan now, not least to answer the case about evil financial services. So Jan, hello. Yeah, I think you mentioned that you've been involved at Aberdeen in a number of projects that are starting to explore the application of AI within the organisation. So any thoughts on the sort of levels of trust in financial services at the moment, and some of the maybe the answers that those projects bring?
Yeah, no problem at all. I'll try and cover some of that off. So just to set the scene, I'm Jan Buchan. I head up the business services legal team at Aberdeen. So we support the business in relation to a number of things, anything that really sort of makes the business operate, but technology, outsourcing, commercial arrangements, IP, sort of a range of matters. And we're very much embedded within the business and the strategy going forward, in terms of how we want to sort of leverage technology, how we want to become more efficient, and what we want to do to promote sort of a better environment for customers in financial services, and to use what we have and what we can change to do that. So just picking up on the trust point, where I was going to go here in terms of sort of how we've approached AI, I'm going to start with the benefits and the pro-innovation approach that we're trying to foster within Aberdeen. And it really touches on some of the themes that you've raised there, Steph, because I think first and foremost, we wanted to look at AI in terms of what it could do for our business, what are the strategic drivers and the tactical drivers. Why would we use it, rather than just seeing it as something new that everybody should be using, really looking at why and what we could achieve through that. So looking at the lens why and what are those strategic drivers for our business. So client-led and good customer outcomes is at the top of the list there. I think in taking that pro-innovation approach, we recognise that there's a lot of good, to your point, Steph, that can be achieved through using AI, but we need to balance that obviously against the responsible implementation of AI, and how do we then tackle each of those, the inherent, the existing or the new risks that come with it. I mean, one example in relation to good customer outcomes that we've looked into in quite a lot of detail, which the FCA have themselves called out, is how does AI dovetail with consumer duty with retail customers? You've then got sort of a real focus on bias, inertia, vulnerabilities. How do we tackle each of those to make sure that financial services can really sort of adopt it in a responsible way? So some other things, I mean, clear positive business impacts. We've seen a lot of good technology, and we are starting to explore some of the technology in terms of how we could take some of those strategic drivers forward. What tactical wins could we achieve for the business? How does it work? What would the use cases look like now, in 1 year, in 5 years, and going forward? What are we doing with our business partners and our strategic partners to understand how they are developing their pipeline and where the benefits are of the technology? So really focusing on that pro-innovation approach and balancing it against the responsible adoption. So what we've done at Aberdeen, we have implemented an AI governance framework of late. And as part of that, we have looked at the strategic drivers, but we've also then compiled a set of key guardrails to ensure that we do have that responsible adoption in mind, and we're fostering a culture right throughout the business, from board through exec, through key stakeholders, to make sure people understand what the key guardrails are, how they need to be embedded in ordinary processes, and maybe what new processes do we need to create or to embed in order to tackle these. So some of the obvious ones are the rules applicable to models and to new technology. So do we really understand how they work? Have we got the right level of oversight and human judgment involved? And that in turn begs the question, do we have the skills and expertise in order to understand that? So I'm a lawyer. I'm very fast becoming a prompt engineer in terms of how I use technology, and that will just develop. So we're going to need new types of people within traditional business units and functions going forward that really sort of understand how to use the technology and how to understand it properly. I mean, data, I could go on for days around data and the integrity and the security elements around that. Does AI exacerbate what you already have in that space? I mean, you alluded to it, Steph, in terms of the regulated nature of financial services and what we have to do already in relation to data and testing and ensuring integrity of data that we're using in a customer environment. So does it exacerbate it? I think it does, but there's so many elements of AI that are just what we do already. I mean, data protection will be the same, but you just have a different lens to look through. Data security, again, similar, but are we sure that we are processing data in a way that's still lawful, in a way that if you align it with what we did before, has it become new? Is anything sort of developed so that it takes it into a new world? As I say, we could go on for a number of hours on what the guardrails cover, but we need to look at things like consumer duty, we need to look at things like new regulatory risks and understanding the landscape, ensuring our people understand the landscape, and things like our strategic partners and how we contract with those guys. So do we really have teams on the ground within Aberdeen and within our organisations that can partner properly with AI vendors and really leverage the benefits as well as learn from them, so that you create the strongest and most robust and trusted governance framework within your organisation to take that forward. We're very much in the thick of it, and we are working through potential use cases just now, and it's exciting. Yeah.
Thanks, Janet. And will Aberdeen be a developer or an implementer or a collaborator around AI solutions, or all of the above?
I'd say all of the above. I mean, we're open-minded about sort of what we look at. We do have strong partnerships with our key vendors, and we're leveraging that just now. I think we're taking an approach where we need to really understand, rather than jumping feet first and building something that then sort of either doesn't work in a year's time, or somebody else sort of creates an offering that's actually better for customers and better for the end outcomes. I think we're taking quite an open approach to that. So I think probably a bit of everything, Callum. Yeah,
no, great. And, good to hear the focus continuing from this morning on customer outcomes, because that was a big theme from the session this morning.
Yep.
Trish, can I bring you in? It would be great to hear a wee bit more about your role as Strategic Innovation Director at Fintech Scotland, and some of the planned work of the Financial Regulation Innovation Lab, if I've got that right, and particularly whether AI is an area that the lab will be looking at specifically.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, we will definitely be looking at that. So for those of you that don't know, Fintech Scotland and our partners across Glasgow University and Strathclyde University have been lucky to achieve seed funding to set up something called the Financial Regulation and Innovation Lab. That does exactly what it says on the tin. And if I can go backwards before I go forwards, that comes on the back of a really huge piece of work Fintech Scotland undertook over 21-22, getting out and talking to hundreds of our partners across industry about what was frightening them, what was scaring them, where were the opportunities, Where were the things they felt they could work on together? Where were non-competitive issues? And how could a function like ours help them? So out of that was born the Financial Regulation and Innovation Lab. And from here on in, I'm going to call it FRIL. So I'll be able to tell you a lot more stuff rather than wasting loads of time pronouncing that. So part of the roadmap was about identifying issues and also identifying the opportunities over the next 10 years. AI and quantum came up again and again as areas that businesses were really worried about, areas where they felt there was distinct skills shortages, areas where they felt that they wanted to be ethical but weren't quite sure how. So to Jan's point about the work she's undertaking, and indeed Steph about supporting customers, that concern was very much there for our partners. So I think they are forward-looking on that, but not quite sure how to address some of it. Thus the introduction of FRIL. We're going to be setting up 4 different work streams across that. And one of them, I see John in the back there. John, say hello to everybody.
No.
John Finch is one of our esteemed partners over in Glasgow, and as I say, we're going to work with Strathclyde. And we're going to be undertaking a series of white papers to look at the impacts of this. We'll be looking to collaborate with people across industry, both sides of industry, supply and demand, to really understand where we can do responsible innovation. And I think you've heard the word responsible from both Steph and Jan. I think we all want to be responsible in terms of how we introduce this. We introduce it thoughtfully, carefully, and knowingly. So we'll be working very closely with our colleagues across Glasgow and Strathclyde to really examine those issues, put some white papers out and make them available to everybody. So we will have Creative Commons around that and make sure everybody gets the benefit of those learnings. We'll be looking at innovation calls to think about how we could take that forward and really work with the market to see what's out there, and allow our strategic partners in Fintech Scotland access to that really vibrant ecosystem we have in Fintech here in Scotland. The third strand is going to be around education. You've heard skills gaps all the way through this morning, I think in probably every session you've been in. So again, working with our colleagues across Strathclyde and Glasgow, and of course industry, to talk about where those gaps are and how we practically fill them. Not everybody's got time to go back and spend 3-4 years learning again. So very much looking at things like micro-credentials. How do we make sure our executives are comfortable with this? How do we make sure they don't think it's tech in the corner? And how do we make sure we raise up those professionals in businesses who are dealing with these challenges every day? Our fourth strand then is very much about hopefully what I'm doing today, which is knowledge exchange. So making sure that everything we're learning is being shared with the entire community. Everybody's got access to that and we're all learning together. So my name is Trish Quinn. Please find me on LinkedIn. We're really open about this. We're at the very beginning, so now's the time to come and talk to us about your ideas and about your involvement. Thanks, Callum.
Thanks, Trish. And I suppose that maybe gives rise to a wider question around, the role that the various ecosystem players have, whether it's academia or the finance industry or regulators. Could I maybe just get a view from each of you on that? What should be the roles of those respective parts of the ecosystem? I'll come to Steph first, if I may.
I think at this stage there's very much of a, oh, but it's their job, right? Oh, but it's their job, right? And everyone's kind of like not really sure, who should take the lead on this. So, because ultimately I think with regulation is difficult. It takes a long time. And when you're trying to apply something that is inherently a lengthy, complex process to something that is moving at a rate of knots, like you said, 12 months ago, sat here, none of us would have been aware of ChatGPT and the impact it has across all industries. So I think there's a role for everyone to play. Obviously, academia, put the governments, the industry, regulators, but then there's also a degree of responsibility to ensure that the people, the customers, they have a role to play too, because part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to empower the people of Scotland with the knowledge to be able to constructively and possibly critically enter the conversations into how AI is being used across their lives. So, I think in a way it's everyone's responsibility, but someone has to take a lead. At the moment, I'm not sure. Obviously the UK government has called this Global Safety Summit in November. We at the Scottish AI Alliance, we're trying to do our bit. The devolved governments are trying to do their bit. It's currently a bit of a race, really, because I think there's just no easy answer. Because people talk about global regulation. How is that supposed to work? Kind of thing. There's no one size fits all. But could there? I think regulation in itself needs some innovation right now to respond to AI. And I think there's a lot of talk around that and how that would work. But I think ultimately it's everyone's responsibility, because AI isn't some future thing. It is here. It is permeating every aspect of our lives. There's a lot of distraction at the moment. It's calmed down a bit, to be honest. But earlier this year, all this existential risk of AI, it's a total diversion. And it's really weird, it's funny, like I was at CogX last week and people say, it's such a weird perspective to think, right? About I don't know if it's some weird response to the godfathers of AI, absolving themselves of responsibility, saying, oh, but we warned you, in the future, we might be we might have trouble, when there are actual real harms, problems, and challenges happening right now that is not getting the attention that it needs. So I think ultimately it's everyone's responsibility. I know that's a cop-out answer, but I think it's because no one has the answer at the moment, and everyone needs to work together to work it out.
Yeah. No, I've certainly heard parallels drawn with nuclear proliferation and treaty-based approaches to regulation. So, and there are obviously steps being taken in the EU around the AI Act and things like that. But that's you're absolutely right, Steph. I think we've all got our part to play. Jan, any perspective on those particular roles that academia, industry, and regulators play? And I guess you are industry, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's two things that spring to mind for me that are sort of fairly key. The first is developing strong partnerships. So if I think about industry sort of from within, rather than sort of experimenting in such a fragmented way, I think we need to seek out strong partners. We need to leverage their skills and they need to leverage ours, and we need to help each other. Because I think it's something that AI is not something that you just take and implement and you've got a designed sort of process or plan for. There's an agility to it, there's an iteration, and to deal with that responsibly, I think you've really got to have strong partnerships, and there's probably a role for academia to play in those partnerships as well, again for academia and the universities to seek out those partnerships, but equally for industry and regulators to find that niche. And again, similarly, as amongst industry and regulators, rather than sort of look at it in silos, I think strong partnerships across those people would be key. The second thing that springs to my mind is the talent gap and just talent and expertise in general. I think in particular, academia has a role to play in bridging that gap between the traditional professions and traditional careers and the overlay that we now need to enable people and to empower them to perform in an AI sort of specific world. So really sort of embedding that culture at the level of universities now, so that when they come into industry and the regulatory and governmental sphere, then they're better equipped, because I think, as you say, Trish, we don't have time not everybody has time to sort of go back and learn on the side of the desk, etc. So those are the key things that stand out for me, I think, Callum.
Thanks.
Yep.
Jan and Trish?
I don't think Jan could have introduced it better for me. We're working really closely with the regulators as part of our thinking around this. So really strong relationships with Prudential, the FCA, Bank of England, and places like that, because it's really important, as Jan rightly says, we're all at the table. This won't be solved, Steph, by any one bit. So I think it's about bringing this together and seeing how we can tackle it as a group and move as one. We absolutely think our academics are essential in this. We need to give them the space to do that forward thinking for us, but also industry needs to come and give those use cases and challenge some of that thinking to make sure that what we're developing is robust. And then we need to work again with the regulators to make sure that's going to help us comply. So this has got to be a really symbiotic relationship across all of us, because otherwise, absolutely right, don't see how we can take those steps forward. I think just to bring in our cluster, we've some amazing fintechs in this space already. So we have Aveni, who are looking at natural language processing to understand vulnerable customers. We have Incio, who've just been successful on the Morgan Stanley venture. So lots of really good companies in our ecosystem here. So please, when you have a problem, have a look at what we've got too. Not everything's a new problem, might be new for your business, but you might find in the cluster out there, actually there's some ready-made solutions and they're ready to work with your business now.
Yeah, no, and completely agree. And if anyone was in the last session in this room, there were a number of the fintechs presenting that mentioned the role of AI and the sort of roadmap and opportunities that presents. I mean, the Alan Turing paper did comment on this area of the respective roles, and I think the role for academia was seen to be, developing models and frameworks for responsible AI, perhaps helping in the development of AI standards, which is already a body of work that's underway, and also, how that best integrates, or the integrated finance piece, again, back to the keynote this morning. For industry, it was about data privacy. Jan, you mentioned that, and some of the human agency and human in the loop, and the importance of that, and just ensuring that that's built into governance frameworks. Regulators, I think there was some encouragement around a sort of a reactive to a proactive model of regulation. Again, heard the themes there around innovation and regulation. I think that's absolutely right, Steph, and some promotion of fair competition, because AI could distort the market, both generally and in financial services. So there's very definitely a role for everyone in the ecosystem. I mean, you mentioned, Jan, I think, and I'm just going to touch on this briefly, the workforce impact. I mean, is that something, you see lots of scary headlines out there. You mentioned it's a change in roles and the prompt engineers. How is Aberdeen looking at that and considering it? Do you think it's a major impact on the workforce, and how do you plan for that?
We've probably not thought that far ahead, to be honest with you, Callum. It's more about sort of identifying what we need now, and identifying sort of where the gaps are, and actually identifying if we've got the right stakeholders at the table. So rather than having really small groups sort of developing, throw open perspective wider and see how we can build a robust framework, which is what we're doing, with the right people, and then sort of look at where we might have skills gaps, and actually learning from each other. As I say, I've learned a lot recently from some of our IT architects. I know one of them's in the room here just now, so he's probably thinking, yes, you have. And really just sort of looking at looking at your role in a bit of a different lens. So encouraging a culture where people they feel free to explore more, and really to take their own steps to understand the differences in the technology and the why around it, rather than just seeing a process and implementing it. So no sort of overwhelming remarks on the workforce at the moment, I don't think, Callum, but some good conceptual thoughts about how we embed proper culture around this.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Jan. And I suppose just in terms of the range of potential applications as well, that must be, Trish, I don't know if you've got some thoughts on this, but, I was reading about, improved cyber resilience, fraud detection, trading, improved financial inclusion, forecasting, regulatory compliance. Presumably there are endless opportunities there, assuming we're kind of adopting in a responsible way.
Can I just interrupt? I have to interrupt, sorry. Can we continue that conversation upstairs over lunch?
We can, yeah. Apologies. I've obviously missed my cues there.
No.
But we were getting
it's how invisible I am.
You should just have stood up and waved, Mark. Apologies.
This is the conversation